So welcome to our Tuesday afternoon. So traditionally at the HLF, Tuesday afternoon is the time for the hot topic. But this year we are celebrating the 10th HLF, and so Tuesday afternoon is the time for celebrating 10 years of mathematics and computer science, 10 years of Heidelberg Laureate Forum, and 10 years of the strong connection between the Lindau Nobel Laureate meetings and the Heidelberg Laureate Forum. And so in the three things we have this afternoon, we explore these three different topics. And the first one is the connection between Lindau Nobel Laureate meetings and Heidelberg Laureate Forum. And for this, we will do this in a panel which will address the synergies in research between mathematics, computer science, and other sciences. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for this panel. The moderator is Rebecca Wade. She is a group leader at the Heidelberg Institute for Theoretical Studies. She works in molecular and cellular modeling, and she has been co-founder of the Simplex Corporation, whose aim is bridging scales from molecules to molecular materials by multi-scale simulation and machine learning. Welcome to the stage, Rebecca, and Rebecca will introduce the panelists.
So all of you can come on. Just take a seat. Okay, so welcome everyone from my side to this panel discussion. It's my great pleasure to have four really outstanding panelists for this session. We have a computer scientist, a mathematician, and two life scientists. And I'll introduce them first, and then we can go into the discussion. So our computer scientist here is Leslie Valiant. He gave the Heidelberg lecture in 2018, and I'm sure he's familiar to many of you because he has won both the Nevelina Prize and the ACM Turing Award. He's a computer scientist and computational theorist, professor at Harvard University. He's made contributions in many different areas. The Nevelina Prize in 1986 was for contributing in a decisive way to the growth of many branches of computer science, solving recognition problems of context-free grammars in cubic time, and then this goes on, so many branches. And the Turing Award in 2010 was for transformative contributions to the theory of computation, including the theory of probably approximately correct, or PAC, learning, the complexity of enumeration and of algebraic computation, and the theory of parallel and distributed computing. Our mathematician here is Efim Zelemanov. He gave the Heidelberg lecture last year, and he was awarded the Fields Medal in 1994 for the solution of the restricted Bernstein problem in group theory. He has, through his career, worked in Russia and America, and most recently in China. Since last year, he has a professorial chair at the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen in China. Then, going to the life scientists, we have Louis Ignaro, who gave the Lindau lecture yesterday, and so really needs no introduction to this audience now. But of course, he's a pharmacologist working in New York and received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1998 for discoveries concerning nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. And lastly, here we have Stefan Kaufmann, our second life scientist. He is one of the chairs of the Lindau Nobel Laureate meetings. He's an immunologist and microbiologist focusing on infection biology. He's founding director and director emeritus of the Max Planck Institute for Infection Biology in Berlin, director emeritus at the Max Planck Institute for Multidisciplinary Sciences in Göttingen, and now a senior scientist at Charité in Berlin. And he has published an enormous amount, over 1,000 original papers and reviews, highly cited. And one of his research focuses is on developing vaccines, in particular vaccines against tuberculosis and vaccine-based therapy for bladder cancer. So those are our panel members. And now let's move to the topic. So as you heard from Anna, we're interested in looking at the synergies at the interface between mathematics and computer science and the natural sciences. And you can see, of course, here we have a focus on the life sciences. And one can see that over the last years, there's really been a sea change in the, from my experience at least, the attitudes of life sciences to computation, and really towards embracing computation with the increasing recognition of the need for quantitative approaches and theory, especially considering now the enormous amounts of data that are produced when you think about genomes or imaging data. And of course, with the AI revolution, the artificial intelligence revolution, there are great expectations of what that can do for science, but there are also already great advances. And I think that's really well illustrated by the award that was announced just a few days ago, the Lasker Award, a very prestigious award in the life science and medical sciences, where the basic medical award for this year went to the developers of AlphaFold, which is an AI approach to predicting the structures of proteins. And this went to developers who work at Google DeepMind. And so it's really the first time this award has gone to computational scientists. It's always the domain of life scientists, medical scientists before. And this sort of advance that you see with AlphaFold is really just the beginning. There are many, many more developments going on with the introduction of AI, machine learning types of approaches, and yet one also sees there are many shortcomings. There's much to do if, for example, we're going to use these approaches systematically to discover new drugs. So in that light, maybe we can turn to the discussion, and I think we want to see in this community how we can really synergize these different approaches well. And when you come to do interdisciplinary work, usually it means someone who is trained in one approach has really got to go in and try and work out how to go into a new area. And so I wonder for the computer scientists or the mathematicians here, how many of those sort of computational theories, algorithms are sort of, let's say, out there waiting to be applied in some science way. And maybe I could start with Leslie, who has looked at how his PAC approach can be applied to exploring evolution.
Yes, I think first I'd like to point out that even very weak synergies across the sciences can be very powerful. So machine learning and current AI is everyone likes it, but it came from a very weak synergy with from people who were interested in, who were either impressed by psychology, human behavior, or by neuroscience. But these people, the inspiration didn't come from latest research in neuroscience or psychology, but very, very basic things going back a long way. So synergies across the sciences, which are very weak, have been extremely powerful. So I don't view this as techniques waiting to be applied. So the phrase which is widely used in, probably well known to some of the computer scientists here, is this idea of a computational lens, which for computer scientists means that you, as a computer scientist, you try to recognize problems which have a computational nature, and you try to help. So in some sense, I think one can try to practice this in a kind of a even more less inhibited way. So here, what happens is that you recognize some phenomenon like the brain, and you believe it's computational, which you should believe, and then I think you should go with full confidence and try to have your theory about neuroscience. I suppose the only one rule of the road is that you should make sure that your theories don't contradict known facts. So if you embark on this, you should educate yourself pretty well, and talk to people. So certainly when I worked on this learning first, I spent a lot of time talking to psychologists and going to seminars and trying to understand how what they were thinking before I kind of was ready to say what I was thinking. So this is how I view the synergies.
Maybe Ephraim, I mean, how do you see that? There's many mathematics theories that seem to be, as it were, very pure, but maybe there's much scope for finding connections to the sciences.
Well, I'm a pure mathematician, though I don't believe that there is pure mathematics and applied mathematics. Finite fields invented by Galois waited for 150 years until it became applied. In general, computer science and artificial intelligence is the best thing that happened in mathematics in the last 50 years. Both grew out of mathematics. When I was an undergraduate student, mathematicians already studied machine learning under the name pattern recognition in multidimensional spaces. Well, machine learning and artificial intelligence sounds much better, but it is pattern recognition in multidimensional spaces. Now, I would say that due to to computer science and artificial intelligence, mathematics now enjoys the support in the society that it has never seen in history. I've been teaching in American universities for more than 30 years. I never met an unemployed mathematician. In 2008, there was a crisis in the US. Many people lost jobs. That year, enrollment in math major at the University of California, San Diego increased 5 times because students started to think about future jobs. Computer science created many open problems, many openings for mathematicians, just problems that mathematicians never thought about. And now they do it. And before physics had huge influence on mathematics, in a way, was a leading force. Now applications in computer science and life sciences have a similar influence on computational aspects of mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So maybe looking a bit from the perspective on the coming from the sciences, I mean, what one can notice also is that these approaches with all the machine learning advances are becoming more accessible. So if you think of everybody's trying out ChatGPT and the like, the large language models maybe really help to break down the barriers. What's your opinion? Do you think that will help, or I don't know, Go ahead.
Actually, I think yes, it will help a lot. And I mean, having been here since yesterday and with all these exciting talks, I think there are so many things that we can offer, and hopefully that the computational scientists will also accept. I mean, in my area, let's take immunology. It's a little bit like the nervous system. It has to be everywhere in the body, and it's not through nerves, but it's rather free-floating cells that are, let's say, if you get an injection in your arm, the cells have to communicate with each other and go to all the places in your body. So what we have to do now is single-cell analysis, and that's enormous data. It's not distinct cells, but it's clouds of different cells. That in immunology, I would think what we now call the immunome is open field for computational studies and analyses. Another part, if I may add, is microbiome, which as you may know, has as many cells as the body has cells, and they're all foreign cells. And the data are there, but the data are mostly just the data which allow us to say, okay, these are different bacteria and some viruses also, but we want function. And the function, how much do we have to study, and how much can you tell us from the data what the function of these different microbes is? And it is such a complex situation. It's a big city like New York where everybody interacts with each other somehow. And that's another field where I think we could learn a lot. And since I then combine this also for vaccine design, you know, the simple vaccines, quotation marks, have all been done. We are now looking for the big challenges, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, and that only works if the immune system is fine-tuned and is really doing not a single cell does this, like an antibody in the so-called simple vaccines. And again, here, what you want is to understand how these cells have to be fine-tuned to get protection rather than pathology. So I think it's an enormous field just for my own expertise, and everybody in biomedical fields would have other ideas about it, but I'll rather stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, but maybe just to follow up a bit, you point out this enormous complexity. And in principle, there's been a lot of development of algorithms to do classifications and so on, but you don't necessarily understand what's going on from that. And so there's the question, to what extent or how will we get to the point where we, from all of this analysis, can also understand the process?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, rubbish in, rubbish out. So what we need is the right data and the right understanding how it works together. But I would imagine, I'm not at all an expert, that the algorithms can tell us by sequence similarities, etc., what is going to happen there and what would be the function. I mean, the genes that encode certain enzymes are similar, and they will tell you what this bacterium or whatever microbe would do. So I see at least that we are no longer putting rubbish in with the help of bioinformatics and this case, or computational science, but rather find a way to sort it out, to get the kind of unknown to become a known.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe, Luis, you want to comment on how you see it?
This whole field is actually quite new to me. I was a classical pharmacologist doing lots of physiology and biochemistry and not using a mathematical approach and not really using the computer much except for typing the manuscripts and using PowerPoint. But after reading what is going on and listening to the people here, it's clear that the use, for example, of AI could be extremely important in perhaps, as a pharmacologist, let me say, in developing new drugs, safe and effective drugs. For example, we can feed the computer, if I may say that, well, the program, information that we have on the nature of certain receptors in the body to which drug molecules interact. So if we fed that kind of information into the AI program, would it be able to help us to decide what kinds of drugs, chemical structures of drugs, could be designed that would either stimulate the receptor and not affect other receptors, or be an antagonist, a blocker of those receptors without affecting other receptors, so that we could have much more selective and safer and more potent drugs for the treatment of various diseases. I mean, if I were younger and I still had a laboratory, that's exactly what I would do with, with this knowledge. I mean, we already understand how AI is so effective in looking at images and radiology and telling the physician and pathologist what's wrong with the patient, helping the physician, to diagnose the illness and therefore what kind of surgery to perform, what kind of drugs to give. I think that's been quite successful. And as the process develops further and further, I think it'll be fantastic in treating disease. I'll stop there for now.
Yes, I mean, it really is now at the point where a number of companies have been set up to do AI drug discovery. Of course, they incorporate all the methods that were there, as it were, before and add the AI on. But now they're really getting to the point where there really are drugs going through the clinical trials that have come through that procedure. So it's really beginning to bear fruit, I would say. Yes. So maybe I can ask probably for each of the panel members, what skills would you say that young scientists would need to acquire now in order to really be able to synergize these different, the mathematics, computer science, and the natural sciences effectively? I don't know who wants to start.
I mean, that's asking a lot of one individual person, because the person, for example, I'm a life scientist, so let's talk about life sciences, biology, immunology, whatever. First of all, you'd have to be an expert in that area, a total expert in that area, to understand what's there, what data to feed into, what program to try to get some synergy. And then you'd have to be able to understand artificial intelligence, understand mathematics, understand all of that in order to answer the question, unless you had a group. With this kind of synergy, I think it's very useful to have a group of people, each with a certain expertise, working together in a laboratory. That could be phenomenal.
But I always wonder whether to do really good interdisciplinary work, all the knowledge maybe does have to go into a single brain. So actually, when I was preparing my Heidelberg lecture, so I came across the story of John Kendrew, who got a Nobel Prize for in the 60s for protein structure. And so he was a graduate student in Cambridge, England, and he wanted to do these calculations of Fourier transform to recover. And then he heard through some other graduate student that there was this computer project, which turned out to be the first working computer, first electronic computer in the world. And so he was a chemist, I think. So he went all in and he became the programmer. He did work with another programmer, but somehow he was all into the programming part. He was among the first users of this machine. And obviously after 35 further iterations, he got his Nobel Prize for it. But so I think that's a question whether you assemble teams of different experts or whether you in fact have to assemble everything into a single brain. I don't know.
Well, I think for the computational scientists here, you are most welcome in most laboratories nowadays that look into the future. So I would think if you are a computational specialist with certain expertise, you will find labs that are highly interested, and the offer then would be, if you're interested in getting a healthier world, the time is now that we can go on together. I would think, as we heard yesterday, connectivity is the thing, and I agree this is the connection with the others. So the offer, I would think, in many life science labs would be, you are highly welcome to collaborate and then understand the principles, of course, of the specific discipline or the specific projects. And then I think this will work out at least in a good working lab with specialists of different disciplines. That's the way, in my opinion, we have to go.
I will speak from the point of view of a mathematician. Which skills are needed to do this or that extremely important and very fashionable application? I want to speak in favor of fundamental mathematics. There are many young people here. All these applications of today are based on fundamental mathematics, which first to be thoroughly studied. Because today we are talking about skills needed for something, but when that time approaches, there might be something else. You need to know the basis, because once you know the basis, you will be able to switch from this very important application to that very important application.
Yeah, so there's clearly, I hear, a need for becoming a specialist in something and really knowing that in depth. But then I think there's more question, maybe there are different ways that one can actually, bridge between the different fields. And I think the question whether one can do it all as one person or you need a group is maybe also changing because of the AI, right? The ChatGPT-like tools puts lots of information in the hands of one person, but also speed everything up. So whether one person can do it in time, right? So I think, I don't know how you see that, but I guess we'll still go on with this sort of mixture depending on the actual problem that's being addressed in the end.
If you look at the AlphaFold, this is now used by the biochemists by themselves, but in many, many other disciplines, in my case, for example, both in the immunology and also vaccine and global health issues, you need a specialist in the team. There is not a universal program for these issues, at least at this stage. And so I still plea and advocate strong interactions with amongst different disciplines. But the AlphaFold clearly shows once it's there, you can use it. I mean, it's enormous how biochemistry or structural biochemistry has changed over the last year, more or less, in being rapidly able to produce or to predict structures which apparently are mostly right. I mean.
Yeah, although one has to see, it's also a nice example where it took a while before that the results could be presented in a way that the life science community could use sensibly. So this is also, it's again a communication challenge to communicate the results, how reliable they are, how they should be interpreted, and so on. So the other thing that this AlphaFold example shows is that was developed in industry. So perhaps the balance between what's being done in academia, in industry, or in government labs is changing. Or maybe we have to think about how it might change in order to get the synergy between the different fields. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's always on the specific issue. I mean, there are biochemistry, biology, cell biology has changed a lot. We now give out sequencing. It's reliable, it's affordable, and therefore that makes sense. AlphaFold is another new example added to that list, but there are also specific things and unique things where I think at least in the near future you want the person somehow talk to you and discuss with you the issues. Let's say in the kind of immunology approach, in the kind of prediction of novel pathogens that may emerge over the future. I could not imagine in the next, but I'm not an expert on that, but I would not predict that in the next years you do that by a kind of outsourced program or something like that, and but rather do it by interaction with people, which makes more fun anyway, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, so this would be once the technology has got to the point that it is, let's say, standardized in some way or another, that industry can do it. But we're also seeing, of course, that industry can invest, huge amounts of computing time, for example, that academia struggles to get, which is crucial for machine learning areas and artificial intelligence. So this tips the board a bit in terms of where the development can be done. So
I think that's clearly. I think AlphaFold is an example of big science where they needed a large, very good group, which would have been very hard to collect in a university, and also other resources. So there's clearly, some things will be done in industry and the big science kind of model, but what they're good at is different from what universities are good at. So there'll be room for everybody.
Yeah, so obviously the more theoretical stuff probably still will stay with the universities largely, I guess.
Good applied problem call for interaction between various areas, and that emphasizes that a good university has to produce well-rounded specialists. Say, mathematicians who also were exposed to chemistry, biology, and physics. And chemists who had rigorous and good mathematical courses.
So in that direction, would you see sort of one change one should make in the sort of way bachelor's, master's, or PhD students are educated?
That has been, in good universities, that has been always the case.
In the very good universities, perhaps, maybe not in many universities, if you're majoring in whatever it is, pharmacology, biochemistry, physiology, you really have your work cut out for you because of what you need to do and have a thesis and on and on and on. And to be able to do that, plus to learn, rather complicated mathematics. For you, it's not complicated. But for other people, yes. And throwing in computer science, my goodness. For me, being a pure biologist, I don't see how that is possible for one person to do. I mean, I wish it could be. So that's why I think maybe you need a team of people to really get things done. But if one person can do all that, wow, that would be amazing.
There will be a next panel, I guess, tomorrow. Why do people hate mathematics? Yes, because poor students of chemistry or whatever have to study these mathematical courses. They say, maybe I will never need it. Are you sure? Maybe they will need it.
I've heard that many times, you're right.
Yeah. But I think a different issue, even if you've educated the perfect person, I think, and everyone says how wonderful interdisciplinary work is, so there are just practical difficulties in moving fields when you're in the early stage of your career. So in the early stage of your career, you've been trained to be very good at one thing, and there are just very high risks to moving something else, and it's just difficult. And people on panels saying that everything is good about interdisciplinary work, it doesn't have some much meaning to people at the stage of their careers who are trying to be good at one thing. So certainly in my case, I only started kind of jumping around after not initially in my early part of my career. And I think that's a different issue which needs to be discussed.
Maybe at some point it'll be nice to come back to a meeting here where somebody is here because they received the Nobel Prize, the Turing Award, and the Abel Award. Now that would be fantastic, and I think that would certainly fit to the person you're describing.
So maybe we can open up the discussion to and welcome questions from some of the young scientists. Does anyone have questions or comments from the audience? No, it's very difficult for me to see into the audience if there's anybody. There's a question. Just to the right there.
Oh, yeah. Does this work? Yeah, okay, I guess it works. Yeah, so I'm actually curious about this thing that was there at the very end. So in terms of like people who might be interested in doing interdisciplinary things, like how does one actually sort of pursue support? Like, do you sort of try to publish in, I don't know, different journals, you know, you might not have published, go to conferences you might not have gone to, like, sort of, how do you sort of think about pursuing, I don't know, support or whatever in these other kind of disciplines?
So, does anybody want to address the question? So basically, how do you get support when you consider that in different disciplines, there are quite different publishing conventions, right? In computer science, you go and publish at a conference. In the natural science, you publish a paper in a journal. So this is always, I think, a challenge for interdisciplinary research. We see that in my field clearly, but...
It would depend on the primary topic that you're talking about. So if you're using, you know, mathematics and artificial intelligence, and you've discovered a new, you know, drug to lower the blood pressure without causing side effects, but it was all based on AI, I mean, I think you would publish probably, you know, in a cardiovascular journal, and the approach that you used to answer that question or solve that problem would be the mathematics and the computer sciences. So,
further questions? Behind you there, Andy. Thank you.
I want to dig a bit deeper into that because as an interdisciplinary researcher, I found that it sounds really sexy up front, but it is much more difficult to do in practicality because science at the end of the day is a networked activity. So it's the people that we know that really matter. And the moment you work in more than one discipline, for example, you need to split your time between places where you go. And so I am not fully satisfied with the answer that was given. And I want to come back to that and say how do you get to know researchers that you should be working with if you're only ever in classes with people in your own discipline? How do you motivate to go to conferences if you don't have a paper published, for example, to meet people of another discipline? Are you completely reliant as a young researcher on your supervisor, for example, to have those connections? What other approaches are there?
Well, I mean, I think it's, if you're towards the beginning of your career, it's extremely difficult to work in more than one discipline because the time commitment for learning about the substance of the different fields as well as how they operate is just too much. So I think one needs a main discipline to work in, and certainly if you find the opportunity to contribute to something else, take it. But to really kind of split your time between more than one thing, it's extremely difficult, I think.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, there's been such an incredible information explosion. I mean, I've been doing research since the 1960s, and it's incredible. You know, when you look out there to see all the information that is developed in the life sciences and everything else. You know, when I was doing research, artificial intelligence had no meaning. What was that? You know, maybe it was starting then, but most of us didn't know anything about it. So I think it's really difficult. You've got to focus on one particular thing, and then afterwards you can expand and build upon that.
Yes, I would agree. In the first phase, you have to have a kind of a solid knowledge that you can trust on, and that will convince people then in other fields, scientists in other fields, that you are the right person for that. What I want to say is that, yes, do your studies, but then look around. I mean, there are so in the biomedical field, there are so many there is such a high demand for young bioinformaticians, computer scientists, that if you have that niche for such a lab, that you will be attractive. Believe me, you will be very attractive.
Partially, I agree with your point. Even when you apply for a grant to the National Science Foundation in the United States, if your research falls between two areas, you have additional difficulties because panels are created from core specialists, and you If you do multidisciplinary, you face additional difficulties, but the reward will be big if you manage to go through that. Because you brought new ideas.
Maybe I can also comment. I mean, some fields obviously are intrinsically multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, like bioinformatics, for example. But if I take the bioinformatics example further, there are bioinformaticians who are, let's say, more like computer scientists and always publish in the conferences or predominantly in the conferences. And there are bioinformaticians who are more like biologists and more tend to publish in the journals like the biologists do. And somehow, as a young scientist, if you want to do, let's say, bioinformatics, you've got to still somehow decide which direction you're going, even though you can, of course, partially cross over. But at some point, to go further, you're going to have to go on one side or the other. And I think this is similar in other fields, but still, that means it's still from the bottom up, as it were, interdisciplinary, you need to deal with more than one discipline. But still, yeah, you have to find a community, but there are multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary communities that you can find.
I can certainly add to that from my own personal experience. Way back when I was starting my very interesting research, of interest to me, that is, I was doing pharmacology, biochemistry, and physiology. And then I would take my idea and apply it to the NIH, not NSF, NIH study section, and the pharmacologists would say, well, why don't you talk to the physiologists? And then physiologists would say, why don't you talk to the chemists? Because it involved chemistry. So, here I am sweating it out, and where am I going to get the money to do my work and test my ideas? So I decided to write a grant just to focus on one study section. I got the money and did what I wanted to do. And that's what you need to do.
Science is divided into these areas. And
Okay, so question, where's the microphone gone? There's a question over here in the sort of the mid, here, exactly.
Thank you. So my question is related kind of to the language that is used between different disciplines. How do we prepare young researchers to be able to talk to someone who is not on their own field to foster the synergies? Because if you're so focused and you cannot even talk to someone outside your field, I think we should be more prepared for that.
Anybody want to?
You're right, there are different languages in different disciplines. I would think if you have an expertise and you get into a new discipline, then you sooner or later will adopt. I think that the point really is that teams need to understand that your expertise is another language. It's rather, I know it's difficult, but it's not you, but it's the team that have to accept that there are different people. I always enjoy the group with very different discipline from different disciplines interacting with each other. It's more fun, you learn a lot more looking at the same question, but from different angles. But I agree, it's difficult to get the first step. What wants you in, then you will learn the different languages and get adopted to it and use it then also.
And what's the question over there? So on the fourth row back, I think. There's no microphone getting there.
Thank you. Following up on the two previous questions, so relating to the difficulties in early career researchers trying to do interdisciplinary work, and also to the question between of finding whether teams are necessary or single researchers. I think one of the big difficulties are time constraints in academic positions, because to pursue interdisciplinary work, something that might be necessary is for one person to get a good grasp, not necessarily become an expert, but get a good grasp of different areas. And that process, to this day, I think, hasn't really got a place in, like, perhaps if you're doing a PhD, then you have a time pressure which will make you give up on trying to pursue interdisciplinary work and finding intersections. Or if you're doing, if you're in after your PhD, so you're very mindful of how many years after your PhD are you, and then you to apply for postdocs, because then you have to get a position. I speak that as someone who's in the master stage, so and who is from pure maths, but also interested in biology, for example. So if you could comment on that, I would appreciate it.
I mean, all I can say is I had to do all of that, you know, PhD and this postdoc, that postdoc. By the time I started my own career, I had lost half my hair, you know, so it does take a while.
So yeah, if I answer the question, so my answer is that you'll probably know that certainly at very early stages of my career, I had opportunities to talk to someone in a different field because I had some ideas, and I decided not to. And it was probably the rational thing to do, that if I'd embarked on this collaboration, who knows how much investment of time it would have taken. I don't know what the result would have been, so I stayed to what I was doing. But later in my career, I did make different decisions. I was happier to talk to someone at random and things like that. So I think you'll probably know what's reasonable to do in your stage of your career as far as being adventurous in talking to people in totally different fields, because it's a very big investment of time and effort, and they're learning the language, certainly.
Okay, I think we will have to wrap it up there. So that was the last question. And I should note, perhaps, I mean, there are some schemes where there are additional time for courses for multidisciplinary studies. So some places that is instituted sort of an institutional way. Anyway, I want to thank the panelists. I think we discussed a lot of important topics that you can go on discussing. I think that I see that sort of also pushed by the advances in the technology and machine learning and artificial intelligence, there is scope to make crossing the bridges between the different disciplines easier. And so even if it's difficult, it's something we probably all will need to continue thinking about. So thank you all very much.